Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Carlson Cards podcast. This should be a really very fun episode. We have on Korey, who goes by @K_cards on Instagram. Korey's going to be fun here because he has a very broad way that he collects, kind of similar to our guest a few weeks ago, Danny. But in addition, he has a very deep fandom for two really popular sports teams, which are the Dallas Cowboys and the Boston Celtics. So this should be a lot of fun. Really excited to learn more about Korey. Obviously, our first time chatting and meeting, so this will be a ton of fun. So, Korey, how's everything going? How's the summer been?
Austin, it's great to be here. Summer is flying by. It's hard to believe that it's August. Yeah, it's been really busy. I live in the Seattle area, and so summer is kind of like how we all survive because we actually see the sun for a few months, and then we just go inside for the cloudy and rainy season. So I'm great.
That's what I was gonna say because you have like summer and then rain for 9 months, right? More or less.
Yeah, more or less. It's October through, call it May, June. It's rainy. It's inconsistent. Then July, August, part of September, never see the rain. Always sun. It's glorious.
Yeah, it's like we get the winter here, we get depressed because of the snow. You guys get depressed because of the rain, I'm sure, but we live through it. We collect cards. I mean, that's what keeps us, having fun, of course.
Exactly.
So I'll start. We just were bantering a little bit prior to this. I asked where you're from, and obviously you just mentioned Seattle, and then I was like, "Huh? Where'd the sports fandom come in? Then how does that work? Bandwagoner here." So I'd love to hear where that originated, where your fandom of these two teams came from, and maybe just tie in, a little bit about yourself, a little more too, than how collecting kind of ties into all this too. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I get a lot of flack for these two teams being my favorite teams. I'm used to it. I get it. And honestly, it doesn't make sense compared to honestly where I've lived, right? Like I've been in Seattle for 7 years, lived in Salt Lake City, grew up in northern Indiana, so I'm a Midwest person, familiar with those winters. But the sports fandom all just connects back to my dad. Like so my dad was the original bandwagon fan, and so that's just really kind of like how we connected growing up, really watching our favorite sports teams. I also had the benefit of growing up in the 90s. So the Cowboys era was really wonderful then. I've suffered ever since. But that is
Sorry,
really just
sorry about that. I feel like we have some part of that. I'm sorry.
yeah. There's a particular 2014 moment that's still very, very painful for me. But yeah, it's 10 years past. I should move past it. Yeah, I think just the connectivity with my dad. Like he's also the one that kind of got me into collecting cards, right? Like he was collecting and very much in that like junk wax era. A little bit growing up, but I still remember like a box full of like 1991 wild card and like having that junk wax stuff really was something he had invested a lot in, which maybe wasn't paying off. But he got me into cards pretty young age. I also had the benefit of like honestly my best friend in elementary school, his dad owned a card shop. Owned the local card shop, so it was got to go in and buy individual cards, buy some packs of cards a lot growing up. I remember a lot of honestly like Fleer Ultra. Like that is the stuff I feel like I remember opening the most. Like I wasn't able to get up to the like the Flair Showcase and some of those like more expensive packs a lot. But yeah, the connectivity on cards was in my sports teams is really just primarily through my dad.
Do you have any memorable, it sounds like you opened packs. That was a fun memory with, yourself as a kid and your friends, your dad. Anything real memorable that stands out? Any cards you pulled or anything like that?
Yeah, honestly, it was probably like one of the last packs that I opened. I remember it being in the late 90s and it was like Sage. Like it wasn't even something particularly great, but I pulled like an on-card Scottie Pippen autograph
Oh, wow.
out of a pack from Walmart. That was like I still have it in the binder that I got from my parents a few years back. Like it's still sitting in the binder in like decent condition. I wasn't particularly great at handling cards as a kid, but that's one that really stuck out to me. And I know it's late 90s because he's in a Trailblazers
Mhm.
uniform. So, past the Bulls era.
That makes sense. So you go from, that experience as a kid with your dad. I imagine you grew up, you get into high school, college, that sort of thing. Did you stick with cards all the way through, or are you kind of similar to me where you came back into this whole thing a few years ago and kind of have figured it out ever since?
Yeah, I definitely boomeranged back in.
Mhm.
Didn't think much of cards in the 2000s and my college era. I really honestly like came back in at absolute peak bubble. I mean, like early 2021 peak bubble, and had they took some licks in that era because I jumped back in. I was like, oh, I'd collected basketball and NFL and a little bit of baseball growing up, but I came back in from like the NBA lens. Obviously prospecting was huge. You had Zion, you had Ja, I leaned a little bit more towards some of like the Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, SGA. Like I bought some of those cards. I bought things that I had no business buying, like an Mbappe like World Cup card, because I knew I was going to sit there and watch. It was the Euros, and like I was just having my first kid in May of 2021. So like I knew I was going to be homebound watching the Euros. I was like, yeah, I'm going to like watch soccer, and I'm going to hold like look at this Mbappe card and just like root for France apparently. And definitely lost like at least 60% of value on that just based on the timing that I came in. And it took a bit of a pause, I'll be honest, because I was like, oof, like that was kind of a brutal time, listening just to the wrong voices in the hobby. Really wasn't finding like a lane that was actually like collecting, right? It was just prospecting.
Mhm.
And took me a little bit of time to kind of come back in and kind of find my way.
It's funny because you're taking licks sounds exactly like mine. I remember like my first purchase, if I scroll back on my eBay, I can find for card wise was like a Tyler Hero BGS 95 Prism base for like $95. That's like a what, $5 card now. But then you say soccer too. I remember my friend and I, who he kind of joined this with me at the same time. We thought we were geniuses because we found that like 2014 Prism World Cup and people were just starting to talk about it. So we got like a Ronaldo PSA 10 base for like $800 and then sold it for 1,000, and then now that same card's worth like 50. It's just so funny like remembering that time because like you were just saying that just it's almost nostalgic and it's only been like 4 years, but it's just so stupid.
I know it was, but my Mbappe was like the red blue wave, like it was the
Mhm.
color match. I was like, oh yeah, this just has like a lot of staying power. As a PSA 9. I think I got it for like $800 and ended
Yeah.
up selling it for like 300 maybe, like, and just like, oh, it'll go back up, and the plummet began.
Yep.
So it was interesting, and I think like just having that staying power has made collecting all the more rewarding now that I've actually found like the lanes that matter to me.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. There's like two things here I want to go with this. Is number one, how did you find and the collector side of yourself and that avenue of the hobby? Number one, actually, well, that's number two. Maybe number one is why do you think you stayed and a lot of people left after getting burnt like that? Right? Like I feel like I don't know why it just connected with me. Right? I finally found cards I liked, and then it was like I'm here, but then I noticed a lot of the people that joined around the same time aren't because they got like you
Yeah.
said had the licks and then left. But why do you think you stayed and then number two, and maybe it ties to that. How did you kind of find the collector side of yourself and the avenue there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think they kind of are connected. I think for me, like, I just felt definitely, it helps having like deep passion and for like the teams that I like, right? And so that's naturally, I think, kind of where I transition post like, you know, post prospecting. The like, I think some of the staying power there too was that it just became clear that like I actually enjoyed it, and then it wasn't necessarily about. It didn't have to be about the money. It didn't have to be about the investments. It just needed. I just wanted to. I needed to reconnect with like what actually interested me as a kid in collecting. And I actually had like some personal stuff happen that really kind of helped spur it for me as well, which was it was tough, but obviously my dad was the one that connected me to collecting. And I just a couple months after becoming a father myself, I actually lost my dad really
Oh,
unexpectedly, and had started talking to him about some of the collecting I was doing. We were like really like discussing some of the Cowboys cards that were out there and the ones that like he always liked but couldn't get in the 90s. And so coming back from that break, like actually a part of my process, like oddly enough, as now that I've had time away from it, has been a little bit of that connection to like almost like the grief and healing process a little bit for me.
mhm.
Like it was like that was what really I think made this like such a deep connection, and really like spurred some of the direction that I ended up going.
I'm sorry to hear about your dad, but like you
Awesome.
kind of seem just from talking to you. I mean, that's where you can live through him now is with the cards and that sort of. It's just so cool. I feel like I don't know. It's just an amazing part about this. It's the nostalgia. It's the tie to family, tie to how you grew up. I mean, that's just amazing. I'm sure that's part of the reason, like you said right there, why you stayed and it stuck so well.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the kind of like where I dove straight in was like getting into the '90s Cowboys stuff. Like that.
Hmm.
That is where I dove right back in. Especially focused on the trio. We had the triplets, the Irvin, Aikman, and especially Emmett. And I remember like, and I'm also just like I'm a bit of like a spreadsheet nerd, so I've got a lot of different spreadsheets, a lot of different iterations. But I remember building one where I was particularly just like, all right, what are all how many different refractors and like Chrome, Finest, Bowman do each of those players have? And it's like I have a spreadsheet. I think it was like Emmett had like 93 and Aikman had somewhere in the 60s and Irvin had somewhere in the 30s. And I was like, that's what I'm going to go after. Right.
Hmm.
And I started kind of like building towards that a little bit. Also had a deep love as a kid for like specifically 1998 Flair Showcase. And so started focusing a little bit on like building the legacy collection set for those three players as well. I mean, I got over time have built that out a little bit. Like got every row of legacy for Irvin, all of them, but a legit row 2 for Aikman, a couple for
Hmm.
Emmett. But yeah, I dove deep into that refractor research and just really enjoyed the process. And I got a little bit honestly like lucky that early in that process I honed in on like what are the kind of lowest serial numbered ones, which ones are going to be kind of the hardest to find. There's certainly like the golden anniversary like Bowman
Hmm.
Chrome refractors that are numbered to 5. Nowhere like 2 of those are, but those were ones that I was outside of that one. Like, what are some of the other ones that I think might have more eye appeal to me? And zeroed in on the 2002 Finest, which I know has gotten a lot of love in this podcast, and it'll get some more love as we go through my cards. But that is, I was actually able to find like the X Fractor and the Gold Refractor within like 2 months of each other, both through eBay and some like deep Instagram research to identify and get a hold of the sellers. But that's really where I started to dive in. And then it's I don't know, my path, like I've just kind of enjoyed the ride, right? Like my path
Hmm.
has kind of meandered a little bit, like really after deciding that I did, like I felt like I was missing out if I just went after those refractors, right? Like there were so many cool sets that I feel like I would just be ignoring. And so I kind of abandoned that approach a little bit, went much deeper on like Emmett Smith stuff. So like Emmett is the biggest part of my PC right now. So I lost track of how many Emmett cards I've added over the last few years, and then started to expand a little bit more. What are some other Cowboys of other eras that I've really enjoyed? Des Bryant's one I particularly focused in on. I always loved his passion and his ability to just go up and get the ball. Just like so many good memories. Throwing up the X a little bit. Jason Witten and others are some Cowboys that I started add in. Basketball's just kind of always been there. It's kind of always been on the back burner, one that I've maybe paid a little bit of less attention to. But that's been, that would get me to about spring 2023. And I started to feel the little bit of this just like plateau, if you will, right? Like I felt like
Hmm.
I was very player PC focused and felt like, the satisfaction of just adding another Emmett wasn't like, it was definitely plateauing. I just wasn't enjoying it as much. I was kind of looking for a little bit of a different direction. I was adding some current Celtics because I've definitely had the benefit of some continued playoff success for that favorite basketball team, which finally broke through. And it was spring summer last year, and oddly enough I found a post from Danny, who you just had as
Hmm.
a recent guest, modest card collector or modest card collection, and found his NBA MVP set. And I just geeked out on that. I thought it was like one of the coolest things I had seen in the hobby, like this idea of like kind of having those constraints but still being able to like appreciate the greatness of the sports that you really love. And that spurred just like a huge deep dive for me over the course of weeks to a month. Again, building more spreadsheets, understanding like who won the different awards across different sports, particularly NFL and NBA, who were stat leaders, and starting to think about like, this could give me some exposure to those, like some of the sets that I really love that, especially on the football side, that like I didn't have players that I collected a ton of that were, especially in those early 2000s, right? Like that was like a pretty sleepy area for the Cowboys, but didn't have like the many cards in like say the 2003 Topps Chrome, uh,
Hmm.
which I think is like just a beautiful set, and like the 2006 Finest, another one that I think gets a lot of love here, but deservedly so. It's like one of my favorite 2000s football sets. And so yeah, I just kind of went down this path, which I can certainly talk about more. But that meant that basically I'm in this position now where it's like I have my team and my player PCs, and I think I keep it to maybe 10 or less, like really core, strong cards that I love, that kind of capture the essence of my favorite players over time, and then kind of build some of these award-winning sets as a way of just more appreciating the sports. Maybe distancing myself a little bit from the playoff pain of the Cowboys, and having that be such a huge part of my PC. Maybe that's a little bit of a factor as well.
One thing I want to highlight there before we dive into some of your set runs you're just mentioning is you mentioned the player collecting and kind of plateauing, because I don't know if I've heard someone frame that up really well in here, but I've gotten that general sense from a few people. It seems like people are either I collect this player, I'm gonna get absolutely everything, and I'm gonna enjoy it for years. Whereas I feel like, and this sounds like yourself too, I ran into this point with Peyton Manning where I accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish. I bought everything I wanted outside of maybe one or two cards that were not more than my car, right? Like that's just part of it. And then it was for me where obviously you're obviously where I started like set collecting a little bit. And what's really cool is yourself now too with this, it sounds like you kind of made your own through again what Danny kind of mentioned already too, but your own like set collecting experience where you still get to collect all these different players, all these different sets, but you have those boundaries somehow. Like how important to you are the having like a boundary, if that makes sense, with like some sort of collecting like this? Because I feel like it's so easy otherwise to run with everything, but you doing it a way that I'm sure you're going to talk about. It's interesting how you kind of like, okay, this player has to be from this year and that sort of. I'd love to just hear that side of things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and credit to Danny. I mean, I sent a bunch of messages to him. He had like no ego about it. I was like, I really think like you've inspired me to go after
Yeah.
some things here. The constraints I think are important, right? And then it's not to say like there are certainly like a number of different Emmett cards, Des cards that I still kind of have my eye on, and will add, kind of like time over or over time here. But the constraints I think are a little bit enjoyable, especially if I'm looking at any modern players, right? Like just the sheer volume of cards, the sheer volume of parallels, like it, I really actually enjoy the constraints, and it also gives me a pathway to just having exposure to appreciating sets that again my player PCs might not be a part of. Kind of gives me that avenue to it. Just enjoy cards a little bit more broadly, and that's a little bit more what I did as a kid as well, right? Like I collected big like players that I really enjoyed. I loved collecting Sean Kemp, for instance, in the '90s. Actually, like grew up in my hometown, went to the same high school as Sean Kemp, so I had some connection there, and actually to go after some of the award-winning sets, I actually like jettisoned off part of that PC for the time being. But it gives me, I really do actually enjoy the constraint of collecting, whether it's the award-winning sets or it's the kind of building connectivity between cards and player PCs. I don't have a lot of full team sets. I think one that I do is like the 2011 Topps Chrome, like Atomic, kind of cracked ice ones. I have like the full Cowboys team set, but building connectivity across players is something that I've enjoyed. And again, that's just a version of a constraint that I think gives me direction and allows me to not just get lost and overwhelmed.
That totally makes sense. And to kind of tie to the constraints in these sets that we're talking about, we have some photos here. You gave me some examples of some of the cards that you have, and I think we'll touch on the three main award winner sets that you've kind of hinted at already, but we'll touch on them here. I
Yeah.
would love if you could kind of talk about this NBA MVP set. Maybe if there's any players that stand out that you were maybe surprised or kind of fun to add cards for, or if just in general you have any, cards, especially shown here, that you really like. I'd love to just hear what you have to say about the set.
Yeah, so this is one, right? And I think for each of the, kind of award-winning sets that I've gone after, I've focused on Well, like the first thing that's important to me, I think, is photography, and I think that is a way that allows me to really sort through the noise on some cards, right? Like especially on basketball, like in modern cards, there's been just some questionable photography choices. Like you feel like the face is completely hidden, and just like, and it just doesn't fit well with the theme. It allows me to like remove that noise from what I'm searching for. Another criteria is that, like, where possible, like having something that's actually like truly short printed or serial numbered, I think is something, again, just another kind of criteria, kind of builds on a little bit of just kind of more rarity into the set chase. Yeah, and here, and this is kind of where a difference for like NBA versus NFL for me too. Like NBA, I think I enjoy inserts a lot more than I do in the NFL, and I don't know if it's just the quality of the like themes and designs, or kind of like the more or less the lineage of, like, we know how popular 90s inserts are in basketball, and maybe there's a little bit of that lineage draw as well. um and with this set, like, it allows me to collect players that I don't think I ever would have collected, right? Like I have a lot of reasons. I loved to hate LeBron James as a Celtics fan, but I, as an adult, like, I've just like matured and realized that, um like, to appreciate kind of his greatness, honestly. Like, his staying power, his longevity is insane, probably unmatched. And so, like, I actually have a card representing here, and I'll describe, for those that are just listening. So the 2009 2010 exquisite collection, just base card, but I think all those are serial numbered to 199. This one has just like this like a beautiful color match, like LeBron kind of lifting up for a layup. The camera positions clearly like kind of like behind the backboard, and it's the last. I believe that's the last year of Exquisite as well, and so it's kind of has some set importance there. But that's one where it's just like, again, the photography always matters. And there's one thing that I've picked up on over time is that you have the kind of layered refractor effects, sometimes like X fractors, and whether or not that layer, the X fractor layer, actually occurs on over the top of the player or behind the player, and if the player is actually set up above that, as like, that's actually mattered to me a little bit, because like, I like the clear imagery of the player when the player is actually set out from the kind of like refractor effect. Like I have another one here that's the 2015-16 Revolution Showstoppers Cosmic of Steph Curry. The Showstoppers set is one that gets a lot of love in the basketball collecting space. This is the first year of that Showstoppers insert set, which had some continuity for, I think, at least 3 or 4 years across Revolution. Obviously, Revolution's like got just great shine. This one also just happens to be like the highest graded copy in the set. They are really tough grade in a PSA 9. I'm not actually one that we're grading is huge for me. I've actually, like, admittedly, I have never submitted a card for grading.
You
Never.
could deserve a round of applause. That's impressive. True collector right here. Meanwhile, me
It's
over here sending way too many out every month.
I mean, look, I just watched your video about how to like prep grading and some like the recracking and
Yeah.
resubmitting, and I think that's honestly been like the deterrent for me, is like the
Mhm.
some of the inconsistency.
Yep.
You see too many examples of 7s and 8s turning into 9s and 10s, and that just feels. I'm also like kind of tech oriented in my professional life, and so I just feel like the AI train's a little inevitable on some of the grading, just from a business side perspective, and honestly, probably from a consistency side perspective. And I've seen like grading companies like Tag out there doing that. It looks really interesting. But yeah, it's I'll eventually do it, right? Like, especially for parts of my player PC, if I want to, sell some Emmett cards, there's certainly some equity I can create in having some. I have some great raw condition ones where it's like, if I want to move on from them, maybe
Mhm.
I'll submit them to grading first, and
I
I'll come to you for advice first.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you because yeah, you just mentioned a video I literally just put up where I had an order that was it was just everything across the board was just lower than I thought, and I trust myself now because I've graded a lot, and so I in the video I snapped out 3 that were 8s, and I was like, these are 10s. I've graded like 30 cards from the set. They're a 10, and they got a 10 the second time, and like to your point, right? Your takeaway from that, and I'm sure from other examples of the same thing is not great because it's just like if you're collecting the card, what does it really matter to you that much? I mean, probably not too much. For me, it's been I've noticed my process has shifted, and it's always kind of been this. I like just so very rarely buy a 10 unless it's a card where like you have no other option. I've talked to other people on here where it's just a bang for your buck to just buy raw or buy a BGS or an SG. I mean, it's just I don't know. I'm not a big like PSA 10 or bust guy, but obviously I have a lot of them, but I'd rather, buy and not pay a premium for it, if that makes sense. That's kind of been my thing here. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree, and I think for certain types of cards like that, that grade premium maybe changes
mhm.
over time, right? Like it is pretty significant for a PSA 10. I have very few PSA 10s in my collection. Obviously, the ones that I have are ones that I've purchased and ones that I think matter. And I don't shy away from buying graded versus raw, right? Like in this NBA set, half of them, the examples are graded here, and half of them are raw. Like maybe for OCD's sake, I may end up putting them all like either. I don't like some of these. I don't think I would dare to crack. Like having that Steph Curry in a 9 is actually pretty important. So I may consider putting all of these in PSA slabs eventually, putting them in set registry or something like that. Yeah, it's been a part of the hobby that I know is there. It's got value for some, but like I get to just enjoy the cards however I get them, and like that's been a part of the fun. And I think some of
Don't
these.
move to the cult. Don't come over to the cult of grading. I feel like I'm just at this point where I just do it because to do it more than anything.
Yeah, it's I just think that industry is gonna obviously it's consolidating a lot.
Mhm.
PSA does a ton of volume, and that's grown year over year over year since 2019, right?
I
So
saw a stat today. It was like 34% gain from last year. If you know compound interest at all, 34% over a 10-year span is, I mean, I can't do the rule of 72 in my head, right? But that's just obscene. So
yeah,
I agree with that there. I want to know where are those cards are grading, because I also think though part of it is, like, right, this era we collect or an overlap with like these scarce cards, right? There's not randomly going to be 10 million of that card graded, but it's like I'm always just curious where these cards come out of the woodwork that are getting graded. A lot of it's probably modern, a lot of it's Pokemon, I'm sure, but I don't know. It's just crazy to think about.
yeah, I think the sheer print volume honestly
Mm.
probably contributes to that with a lot of modern cards, a lot of prospecting. You get a few good quarterback classes in the NFL side, and you
There's a
get a
million cards graded right there.
yeah. Just like I haven't kept track of how many CJ Stroud variations there are out there, and while he's definitely been impressive as a quarterback, like, but that is that has to play certainly a factor in the grade volume and change over time. And yeah, just it's one of those where I was like, I'll sit back and see what happens, and just kind of sit here and enjoy my collecting lanes in the meantime, and continue to build like sets like this one, and being able to get, and, you can probably tell that color matching is something that's important to me, or like
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you prioritize this? So I should have asked at the very beginning, but how these sets work for you is if they win the MVP that year, that's the year you're going for a card. You're prioritizing looks, color matches, importance of set, all of those kind of things, essentially.
yeah. So I mean, the number one constraint certainly is like the set comes from the year that they win the award. Again, hat tip to Danny on that inventiveness. And then photography first and foremost. Probably safe to say shine and design, I think are crucial. And then short printed or serial numbered is ideal for a lot of what I'm going after. And what is true short print, right? Like I think that's
Mhm.
even a moving target. Especially if you're looking at modern cards, like I don't downtowns are not short print anymore. I know that that's circulating a lot. But yeah, that's a bit of the criteria, and just like some of the importance of photography and color matching, I think draws here, right? Like there's the 2002 Topps Chrome Tim Duncan white refractor. Like the image of that is just it's fantastic. Again, it's another like behind the backboard image. He's actually going up against Shaq and Kobe in this photo, right? Like the significance of that and just like what that says about that era of basketball. It's just like it's really hard to deny. And so that one felt like such a strong fit. You've got and these range in terms of just like I would say a lot of these examples here are probably probably the priciest examples that I have in the set. I certainly have some that aren't so much, right? Like there's the Giannis certified green from 2000, I believe that's 1819. That one's numbered to 5, but then right next to it you've got this Jokic Donruss complete players insert. It's like a red laser numbered to 99. That one for me is like it brings in like the secondary colors from that specific Mile High City jersey. I love the Donruss laser effects, but that's maybe a $20 insert card, right?
Mhm.
Like, and so for me, it also this set is about appreciating where there are just good sets and beautiful designs that aren't necessarily like the Prism, the Optic, the Select kind of stuff, right? Like another set that I don't have one in right now, but I could point to where it's gotten some love, right? Is like 2023 Prestige in the
Oh yeah.
NFL, right? Like those golds to 49 are beautiful. They're beautiful cards, and they're not expensive compared to others. And so this ultimately, I hope, is to mix in some of those cards that are maybe a little bit more affordable, and show that I can just really appreciate good design of cards, and it doesn't have to be just the expensive sets. Though this NBA one is like, the Warp Speed Jordan, like the cards that are on here are probably the most expensive of any of the award winning sets that I've gone after, just coincidentally.
All right, now we're shifting on to the NFL Defensive Player of the Year set. One thing I'll ask about this too, and obviously talk about some of the cards here as you see fit. But how do you decide when you purchase a card? Like I know, like for the NBA, we just talked about, you have 15 out of 54. I'm just looking at your Instagram here. NFL Defensive Player of the Year, you have a lot more. It's 39 out of 53. So like, why are some sets you're way further on, others you're holding off? Is it just because the right card hasn't popped up yet? Do you kind of just wait till you see that one that fulfills what you're looking for? I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I'll say, like, for each of the active sets here that I'm tracking, I've done a lot of research in terms of like what are the sets that player is in that given year. A lot of like, I utilize like the saved functionality on Instagram into like saving cards into different folders based on that so much, both just to even track like specific card examples or to just track set examples that I then want to go back and look at later and say like, oh, is JJ Watt in that set, right? Like being so that is for each of these sets, and for each of the gaps that are there, I have like a top 2 or 3 cards already kind of picked out, right? So I'm being very intentional about the cards that I want to go after in those. Maybe sometimes that shifts if one just that I see comes available, and it's just like, that is, I even my research didn't field that one. That one looks fantastic. Like I really want to go after that. Like I definitely have some intentionality and some research about like, what am I trying to build, and like which specific cards do I want to add. And certainly the Defensive Player of the Year set one is one where like there are just less choices, right? Like defensive players don't end up in sets as often.
Like I was looking here, I see the 2009 Bowman Chrome Green Charles Woodson. I've seen that card, great looking card. But like I was just thinking, what other options do you even have that year for him? Because he's Packers uniform. I'm like, I don't think he's in that many sets that year. He's really not in that many.
No, he's not, and I don't remember exactly how much, but it was very clear that like Bowman Chrome was going to be it for Charles Woodson in 2009, right? And one thing I've like learned through this process, especially on defensive players, at one point I had considered like, oh, maybe going after like the sack leaders, for instance, right, and not just the Defensive Player of the Year sets. But for a lot of those, you had guys that broke through and became sack leaders and were not in card sets that year, and then in the following year they're in the obviously a significant volume of stuff, right? I think was it like Leroy Glover, possibly? Don't check me on that. Might have been one for like the Saints in the early 2000s. Like there are examples of guys that kind of broke through and weren't in sets in that year. And that was one that I did the research to see if that was the case in the Defensive Player of the Year sets. I think it's only one instance where, LT, Lawrence Taylor won it in back-to-back years. I think 81 and 82, if I'm not mistaken. I think 82 was like the rookie year. And so, but he's got 2 different cards from that set. And so I'll add both of those cards, one to represent 81, one to represent 82. And on the Defensive Player of the Year set, it's mostly vintage that's left, or, 80s and earlier. I think from 1990 through, with the exception of Myles Garrett this last year, I've recently added cards to represent all of those players, and still have some at ComC, and some of those early 90s ones, like a Cortez Kennedy card. Like nobody's really grading random tops 1992 or whatever Cortez Kennedy cards, so like that's just a raw card right now. It's like $1, right? But and I think a part of the Defensive Player of the Year set too is like I just changed a little bit of my calculus in terms of how much I was willing to spend on cards for a spell, right? I've got family stuff to support. My wife just started a business and left her tech job. And so like, I just dialed things back for a spell, and I really wanted some lanes in which I could still enjoy collecting. And so this Defensive Player of the Year set is one where I've just really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed watching like some of the best defensive players And they definitely don't get a ton of hobby love. It doesn't seem, at least. Certainly their prices don't reflect it, which I enjoy to a certain degree here, and being able to collect this, right? Like being able to add, I've got the 2017 blue Prism, which was like a retail specific short print of Aaron Donald. Again, it's like a color match, great photography. He's just like standing on the line, clearly, after the huddle, standing on the line, waiting for the play to start. Great depth of field and the photography there. I used to do photography as like a side hustle gig. And so I think that that's a little bit of like, again, the appreciation for the photos, right? Like the 2012 JJY, like just showing like pure like passion and energy, clearly just sacked somebody. And of course, that's 2012 Prism. It's beautiful. It's the silver Prism. So there's some iconicness to it. And so again, like these examples, you can just kind of tell that like where the photography matters, right? Like stray hands on the ground, just celebrating, undoubtedly a sack. The Warren Sapp one, like he's literally, that's from like 1999 Rookies and Stars. It's a longevity parallel where it adds some kind of holofoil to some of the lettering and the team logo, where he's just like standing and posing, and like this would definitely be a taunting flag in the modern NFL, just like standing and screaming over the quarterback. Like it's hard to not appreciate that kind of imagery and what it represents from like that player at their absolute peak.
Yeah. Awesome. Love all the insight here. And yeah, the selection on photos here, I'm really appreciative of how, like, just watching, like viewing this, I should say, as someone who likes cards, it's cool to know, like, you just know how particular you are of what you're adding. Just like you said, based on the photos, like you see that JJ Watt, it's just like, damn, have never seen that photo, but how cool would that card, like, would that card be in the context of that play, like that photo and that sort of thing. That's really awesome. All right, next we have your NFL Offensive Player of the Year set. So if you can kind of touch on some of the cards here, and then question for you here: is there any surprises, like any players that you did not realize were Offensive Player of the Year? Because I feel like that's an award I don't mentally keep good enough track of, and I bet you there's ones in here where I'm just shocked that they were in the set.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one that jumps out to even getting to that question quickly is like how quick of a flash in the pan Chris Johnson was, right? Like 2009 season, just absolutely torched. It's not one that I have a photo of here, but I believe I've got a finest refractor from a blue refractor from that year and set. But you've definitely got some more of these like kind of flash in the pan players. That was definitely true on the Defensive Player of the Year set too, right? Like, I'm gonna blank on some names here, like, but Dana Stubblefield, right? Like 90s defensive lineman for the Niners, won it one year, right? Like there's a lot of those kind of flash in the pan players. The Offensive Player of the Year set, there's just going to be a lot of recognizable names. And the reason that I was, I think, a little bit drawn to this one certainly is like the pairing of like Defensive Player of the Year and Offensive Player of the Year, but also just like the MVP award has become such a quarterback's award. And so like I've always really loved like the skill position players, right? Like again, the deepest part of my PC is Emmitt Smith, right? So I have a good love for running backs, hashtag don't collect running backs. And so going after Offensive Player of the Year just allowed to get a lot of receivers and running backs, and certainly there's quarterbacks. There's Brady, there's Manning, there's some Breeze in there as well. But getting more of the skill position players has been certainly enjoyable. And the one that like really made me want to go after this, so the 2003 Topps Chrome like gold X Fractors, I believe those are numbered to 101. I've got a Jamal Lewis here. It's like still in the kind of factory sealed case, but that is just like one of my favorite sets from the 2000 era. It's got that little inset like photo on the bottom of the player, great shine. It's just like a fantastic card all around. And so that was one of the first ones that I got. Kind of hooked me on this, right? And see a lot of, no surprise, a lot of shine here. You've got the 2005 SPX Spectrum to 25, Sean Alexander. Have a lot of, like, that Sean Alexander era was when I first got into fantasy football. I was actually helping my dad do some like fantasy football drafts. And I remember this was the era of the handcuff running back. Like I think it was Ricky Waters that went down in the early 2000s, and Sean Alexander rose and had his dominant era. But this is one where like 2005 had a lot of good sets. Like obviously Finest gets a lot of love there, but like the SPX like Spectrum here just has such fantastic shine. And it's one of those where the image is really strong. It's like a full player image. They really pop on the card against the colors. So that was one where it's like, oh yeah, I definitely want a representation of that set, right? And then there's some like continuity here a little bit, right? Where if you look at the two gold prisms that are in there, I put those in there intentionally, right? So you've got the 1993 Pacific Prisms gold, Jerry Rice. Again, like that's kind of a color match in a way. It's really technically his first kind of gold prism, if you will. Just a beautiful set that I think has a sneaky collector base and sneaky appreciation. Then you go to 2022, and Zenith did like a throwback to 1992 prisms. And so I've got the Justin Jefferson gold, which is one I literally just added last week, and a PSA 9 to kind of build some of that connectivity. And again, secondary color match, that's a theme here. Certainly the one that's next to on the screen, the 2020 mosaic blue fluorescent prism of Derrick Henry is like a super strong, amazing like color match. And that one just pops. That was like a bin smash. Again, like grade doesn't typically matter for me. It was a PSA 10. I was like, these are numbered to 15. I've literally set my eyes on that card months ago for this set. Like I'm just going to add it. Doesn't matter the grade. So yeah, again, the themes kind of remain the same here, but I've really enjoyed just going after some of these players, even if they were their peak was just a year or two, right? Versus like a Jerry Rice, who I mean was just dominant and was the best receiver of all time. Michael Thomas, like he had a great few seasons. The injury bug really torched him, but it's really cool to still appreciate that moment. And the moments in which I went up against him in fantasy football and he torched me.
Not on the field, but on the fantasy gridiron. That's where he went up against them. Awesome. So now we shift to the classic segment here. This is the Mount Rushmore. So you gave me 2 honorable mentions, and yeah, obviously amazing cards. So excited to talk about these 2 if you want to touch on them.
Yeah. Oh, I have to say this exercise of Mount Rushmore is so difficult, right? I really wanted to have some, because I could build like an Mount Rushmore. I really want to have some diverse representation on those 4. But yeah, the 2 here that were close calls for me. So you've got one, I mentioned it earlier, the 2002 Finest Gold Refractor number to 25. This one's a PSA 10. This is one that I actually won on an eBay auction before the set really took off, and I was kind of amazed. It was one of those that was like my bid was at least 2x what I actually got it for, and like it was 2x not just from like I actually thought it was based on like value, and it was a pop 1 at the time. It's now a pop 2 last I checked. So congrats to whoever gemmed that. But yeah, this set's just it's been spoken to a lot, right? It's a beautiful shine, great imagery, strong use of color, and it's one that's just got a very deep collector base. So yeah, I've really enjoyed having that one in a PSA 10. And then the next one is the 1998 Flair Showcase Legacy Collection Row 1 of Emmitt Smith. This was one that I recently found on I think it was through Fund Your Cards. Somebody was trying to offload a bunch and saw this one in there. And I've been after this card for years. Like this was one that like very early on when I started back into the deep Cowboys dive, like this set out for me as a favorite, at least one that was within range. Like I'm not quite there. Like I consider myself probably more of like tier 2 in terms of value. Like I'm not much in the game for PMGs and essential credentials and stuff like that, but I really love, Flair Showcase. This card has not publicly sold since 2012. And so despite being numbered to 100, there just have been no public sales of this card. And so when that one became available, it was a really quick negotiation. And I was, thrilled to add it. It's in a BGS 9.5, which is also really tough. I think any, grading, if you're submitting 98 or, any really 90s Flair Showcase cards for grading, it's really tough to hit, 9s and north, from what I've seen of folks that have submitted some. So like to have this one, and that grade is also, it's meaningful. I think it is a pop 3 with none higher as well.
Maybe some fakes in there too, or some backdoor copies as well.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if row 1 has the backdoor. I know row 2 was the biggest backdoor, and that was actually the first. That was the first Flair Legacy I bought, was a no name on back, Emmitt Smith and Aikman actually in row 2, and that's the distinction, right? Whether it's in the listing or whether it's in the photos. Like if they don't have the blue foiled name on the back of the row twos, then it's a backdoor copy. And you can kind of tell just by sales volume as well. Like that one sells much more than pretty much any other one. That was one of those early hobby lessons, not terribly expensive lesson. But yeah, this row one is like the original shimmer effect as well. And so it's a beautiful card with the blue foil color matching to the Cowboys. It's just have a lot of deep love for this, and certainly the hunt and the scarcity contributes to that.
I was just say do you prefer row 1 over row 0 if you had to pick?
I actually think
Tough
I do.
question.
Yeah, I actually think I do. Yeah, it's like, and I love the row zeros. They've got kind of like the the modern
Mojo.
terminology, like the mojo effect, right? But they're all horizontal as well. And even though I've got 2 horizontal cards in my Mount Rushmore, I still do prefer vertical cards. I think it's that orientation, the effect. I think the shimmers of row 1 slightly edge out row 0 for me.
Makes sense. All right, now onto the real Mount Rushmore, the top 4 here in your collection, regardless of value, that you think are your favorite cards. So if you can just again touch on these. Appreciate how you're describing these 2. Really good job here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the first one here it's the only basketball one in my Mount Rushmore, but it is like the cornerstone of my Celtics and my particular Kevin Garnett and Celtics uniform. It's a classic set, right? Like it's 2008 Topps Chrome. It's a gold refractor, numbered to 50. It's the imagery of Garnett is just like his passion just bleeds through. He's like pulling the jersey up and just like repping the Celtics hard. I can't remember what game this is from. Actually just asked the photographer on Instagram from this if he remembered what game this was from, but I haven't heard back. But yeah, this set speaks for itself in a lot of ways. Great shine in basketball, just an iconic set. Great imagery. This one was a bin smash as well. This was one that I acquired. I haven't acquired a lot of big cards this year, but this one was one of them, as well as that row 1 legacy we just talked about. I think it popped up on eBay in January, and it popped up for a price that I had already kind of offered somebody else on their copy. And so for me, it was just a no-brainer. I looked at it. I was literally in between meetings at work. Like I had a 5-minute break in between meetings, looked at it, saw the number of people that are already following. There were already, 2 offers in. I was just like, no, I'm not losing out on this one. These cards are so locked away in collections, because you have people going after the sets, you have player collectors. So there's a lot of folks that really go after the golds in this set. And so it was one that I just wasn't going to let get away. One that I have no intention of ever getting rid of, because it is just like, it feels like the cornerstone to my Celtics PC. And it was one certainly, right around their big 3 and right after their title in 2007, 2008. So it has a lot of nostalgia for that one. And certainly the iconic nature of the set matters quite a bit as well.
Awesome. Amazing card.
Yeah. Happy to go to the next one. This one is, for someone that hasn't graded cards, I feel like I'm pointing to grade a little bit more often than I realize. This is a lesson for me. This one is a Dez Bryant 2013 Finest Superfractor, 1 of 1 in a BGS 10. So this one is just like, it's kind of stands on its own, right? Like superfractors are just gorgeous. Especially I think, after 2013, I think they lost a little bit of their luster a bit. So this is kind of that last year. It's not my favorite year of Finest, but it is just a gorgeous card. You got Dez with the ball in his hand, kind of maybe in the open field a little bit. And then it's certainly like to have a superfractor alone is awesome, but to have one in a BGS 10 is just kind of nuts. And not something I've seen. So this for me made this seem like likely one of Dez Bryant's like best non-rookie cards in existence. And again, like I had so much love for the passion he brought onto the football field. Was devastated that the injuries kind of again derailed his career, but man, did he have an amazing peak in those 2010s. It was just a joy to watch, and is still like an active area of my PC that I'm trying to expand. And this one's a big one for me.
Yeah, perfect, like, fun player to collect too, where, how do I explain? Like, he's probably somewhat affordable, but there's definitely, like, hardcore collectors because just simply how popular the team is and everything like that. So it's just awesome player to collect, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's one of those guys that has the little bit of that latter tops years, and then certainly into the Panini era as well, right? Like you can still get gold prisms of his for less than $1,000, right? Like they are yeah, perfectly summarized there. Like he's just affordable enough to where it's like I can still obtain some of his best cards, though there are some fantastic Des collectors out there. I think there's
Mhm.
Des B PC on Instagram that just has countless ones of ones and just beautiful cards. And I've helped, kind of land some cards into his collection. And we've talked over the years, some great Des collectors. And of course, Cowboys fans are everywhere. I get it. And so I've got a lot of competition in that space, if you will.
Okay, awesome. Last two cards here. What do we got?
Yeah, so this the pairing with the honorable mention, right? The 2002 finest X Fractor to 20 of Emmett Smith. This one is in a BGS 8.5. This was really the first sub 100 serial numbered Emmett that I added
Mhm.
uh, through a lot of Instagram sleuthing and looking at a seller on eBay that I think had this listed for I think 5x when I ultimately ended up getting it from him
Mhm.
on. And I found his Instagram. I identified who he was. He confirmed he had the card. We went back and forth in negotiation. I brought so much data to the table there. It's like, all right, well, this player tends itself for this, multipliers here, which I don't know if that helped or like sometimes I worry about that being annoying, but I'm such a data driven person where I was just like, I want this card. I love the atomics slash X fractors, right? The atomics were like my favorite all around kind of parallel from the 90s kind of core sets. Just love the way that they kind of dance in the light. Austin, you've described these well in the past, right? Like a little bit that like kind of 8-bit refractorness to them. Like this one dances in the light beautifully. It's it's in a BGS 8.5, one of those that if OCD gets the best of me, maybe I'll crack and cross to PSA if I ever grade. I don't know. But it's just a beautiful card, and it also helps a little bit of that silver and blue color match there. It's just in numbered to 20, right? Like this set's gotten a lot of airtime, and for deservedly so. And it's just one that it's my favorite card in my entire MMPC.
That is an outrageous color match. I never thought of that until I've seen the card in your profile, but never could figure out in my head, why does Emmett look so good in this set? And it's like, I think you just described it right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Last card
Yeah.
here.
Last one. This one is like of such deep personal significance to me. It's actually, it's like one of those like coffin cards, right? Is I think a term I've heard before, right? So this is, and you wouldn't know just without the personal connection. So this is, I actually I can't, I'm blanking on the year. I think it's 2017 or 2018 Phoenix football. It's the game over insert set. This is the super fractor or gold vinyl 101 version, and it shows Jason Witten in the end zone celebrating a touchdown. Well, this happens to be his only overtime touchdown of his career. This was a game winner against the Eagles in Dallas in Dak's rookie year in 2016. This was actually a game I was at, and this was a game that I was at with my dad. This actually happened to turn out to be the last game that we saw, the last play we ever saw together. And this was one that I couldn't believe. I found that this was a card that existed that represented this moment. And like that, there's so much like personal meaning to that trip. Like I was working at a nonprofit job, like based in Utah, and like being able to afford to take my dad to a football game was just something like was a stretch for me. But I was like, we're gonna do it. Like let's just go. Like we wanted to go see the new stadium. Like let's just go make it happen. Like let's go to a Sunday night game, right? Like yeah, against Philly. Yeah, let's just. And so there's so much just like deep memory and fondness there. And so once I realized that this set existed and that was in fact like the play that it was representing, right? Like having that significance, I was dead set on fine. I was like, I don't do rainbows. I'm collecting every card of this. I have no idea if I'm going to find the super fractor. I look on eBay and the 101's there. It's on eBay. It's literally listed the moment I discovered this set. I was like, well, okay, here we go. And it was listed for, I personal significance aside, it was listed for a really kind of egregious price for a Jason Witten card. And so did a little bit of negotiation, but again, wasn't one I was ever going to let out of my sight. And so that's, given the personal significance and tie there, and just like the through line that's meant for like all of my collecting over the years. Like this one's just, it's really hard to beat. And I do have like the rainbow of it. Not one that I posted to my Instagram yet. I think I still have like, a ComC order stuck that needs to get some of those pieces in. But yeah, just one that's absolutely at the top of my Mount Rushmore personally.
It's amazing. And like you said, it's interesting how you can see a card, it's cool, it's awesome just for somebody who doesn't know the story. Then as a collector where you have that connection, like you touched on at the very beginning and we touched on here at the end, I'm sure this is just like will forever be your favorite card or one of them, in your collection. It's just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I could get to the point of being able to have the amazing Emmett Grails of the PMGs and everything else, and this would still sit atop.
Awesome. All right, Corey. So I think we'll wrap up here with a fast five if that works with you. I got 5 quick questions, hopefully that are kind of fun to respond to. So
Yeah,
first one, if you could, so you lived in 3 areas that you shared: Utah, Indiana, Seattle. If you could pick, you could only follow and support the sports teams of one of those areas. Do you have a pick there? Could you decide? I know it's a tough one to start, but I thought it would be kind of fun.
that's a fun one. That's a fun one, right? And Utah's admittedly, putting in efforts to get more professional teams. Right?
Yeah.
Like hockey is coming to town. They're trying to get baseball. Um, as much love as I have for the Pacers and Colts country that I grew up around, I think it's Seattle, and that's with the assumption that the Sonics are coming back. Right, like
Okay.
I think the Sonics are going to come back within. I think Seattle and Vegas make are naturally good expansion spots. So, and again, going back to that kind of Sean Kemp connectivity growing up, and the love for like watching Sonics there, like Seattle fans are passionate. Like going to a Seahawks game is a blast. Like they are such a loud fan base. And obviously like the Storm have had fantastic seasons in the Sue Bird era. And the Mariners, I loved Ken Griffey as a kid. Absolutely, the purest swing of baseball. Even though I don't collect baseball, I still such a fondness for that. So it's Seattle for me.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like a great place to live for the sports teams, I'd imagine. So next question here. How many years until Emmett's rushing records are broken, if ever? If you had to just off top of your head, the over under amount of years it would take.
Yeah, look, who's closest right now? Derrick Henry's probably closest,
But
right?
it
But it's
seems like it's not
probably,
going to happen. Yeah.
yeah, losing tread on the tires given the high volume of carries that he's had.
Mhm.
Like, and the way the NFL uses running backs now, and the way that their contracts look, and kind of how um, oddly replaceable teams are treating that position, it just feels like the deck's stacked against anybody having that kind of longevity, having that consistency, having that amount of health, like missing as
Mhm.
few games as Emmett did. So it's one of those. It's like I caution to say untouchable, but in the current era of the NFL, it really does. It really does feel like it, because it's just you don't see a lot of guys having kind of long peaks. They tend to last maybe 3 seasons or so.
Mhm.
So it feels highly unlikely for somebody to get the rushing record. I mean, I don't recall what the touchdowns are at, and honestly, I admittedly don't recall if that's one that he even owns, given how well LT played for so many years. But the rushing record is the one front of mind, and I just don't think that gets touched.
Yeah. What about, okay, flip question here for the third. What about Jerry Rice? Because we talked about Jerry Rice and Justin Jefferson, right? Kind of the old era, new era. Like, do you think that could be broken? It's so hard. You'd assume yes, but like I don't know.
It all comes to longevity, right? Like
Yeah, just need one guy.
and Rice had fantastic quarterbacks. But that wasn't obvious. Like Rice was just
Mhm.
purely the best receiver of all time in my eyes. Um, and it's hard to tell, right? I think I saw a stat recently that said that like Justin Jefferson, for instance, would have to break 1,000 yards per season for the next like I don't know if it was
17 years,
15
15
or
years.
7. Yeah, it was like mid-teens of years, and you're just like, oh wow, like, and that's to even have a shot at sniffing at that record. That being said, the NFL is such a pass heavy league. It feels like, from a rules perspective, a lot it tends to favor the offense. Just passing volume is going to continue. So it feels like maybe slightly more touchable than Emmett's record. And that's not just me having my my Cowboys fandom hat on.
Yeah.
Just from the way the league works perspective. But I just don't. You've got Justin Jefferson's probably best position right now, but he's still only 3 years into the league. We've seen so many guys that have had fantastic trajectory that haven't gotten there, and guys that have had long careers, right? Like Julio Jones had a good long stint, right? Like I looked back to Des Bryant, who I don't think it was ever going to touch it from a yards perspective, but just as an example of where injuries can come into play, right? So it just doesn't feel, and I don't want to just be purely nostalgic. That one just doesn't feel very touchable either, right? Like it was just a different tier of greatness for Jerry Rice, but that one does feel slightly more touchable than the rushing record.
All right. Fourth question. What's a tip for your beginners or yourself when you first started? If you could give a tip or two.
Try not to make it about the money. And right, like if you're thinking about trying to invest dollars, there are much more stable ways to invest money. Also enjoy the ride, right? Like PCs evolve, and that's really a lot of the fun of it, right? Like it's trying not to get too attached, knowing when to kind of let go of things. Like it's still hard for me to sell things, but right, like it's a necessity if I want to pursue new angles. But it's like really enjoying that ride is great, and just like kind of figure out your signal through the noise a little bit, right? Like what matters to you. Spend time to figure out like what you have connection to, what kind of designs or sets you like. Kind of drown out some of the noise of some of the kind of content that's out there, and find collector communities, like find actual collectors. People that have deep. I've learned so much from just DMs with different collectors. A lot of which have been guests on your show. I've been guests on Brett's show. Like those are the people that I think have a lot of insight to share, a lot of lessons learned, and just like the actual passion behind being a collector. So like finding those communities, I think, is really important.
Awesome. And fifth and final question: what is your favorite hobby outside of cards? What do you do with your family? What kind of things do you guys like to do?
That's a good question. It's like, and I have a son who's 3, and so it's pretty much whatever he wants to do a lot of the time, which is we like to go down to the water as much as possible. He is a kid that doesn't care that the Puget Sound's ice cold. He's going as deep as possible with his little legs. So like being on the water is like, and I've got kayaks. So I love being out on a kayak or a canoe out in the water. Photography was a long passion of mine, and one that I did as a side hustle once upon a time. But it's still something that I particularly kind of enjoy. Even though a lot of my photos these days are photos of my cards that are backlogged for me to post on Instagram. Having a camera in hand is something that I've just always enjoyed, that hobby. So those are probably 2, but it's really whatever my son wants to do right now.
Awesome, Korey. Well, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate everyone listening. Go check out Korey on Instagram. Shoot him a message, connect with him, tell him how great this episode was, all those kind of things. But yeah, Korey, just appreciate it. Thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Austin. It was a blast.